Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Once I reviewed each of his works in the chronological order of publication, but Ka is a wheel, it all comes round again. And here I am once more on a new phase of the journey, one to examine each of the endings of the works of Stephen King, to determine whether or not King deserves his reputation for having an inability to successfully land his endings. The focus of the podcast will be to examine the climax, the falling action, and the resolution of the endings to each of his novels, and break it down by character, themes, conflict, and plot to determine whether or not it meets the criteria of being an objectively good ending. I will also weigh in on whether or not I personally happen to like the ending. And today I am here to discuss the ending of Duma Key. But first, I just want to welcome you all back and acknowledge that there's a little bit of a lie in the beginning of this podcast. I said, each week I will review. That is a lie, clearly, because it has been much longer than a week. So everyone that has been tuning into the Stephen King cast, that has kept me in your feed, thank you, thank you, thank you. And for anyone that is tuning in for the first time, welcome to the Stephen King cast. I hope that you enjoy all of the older episodes and this episode and every episode that has yet to come. Before I get to my review of the conclusion of Duma Key, I do want to read some listener emails, and I'm going to begin with Bob, who writes, I listened to your latest podcast on which you said that you weren't really a fan of Billy Summers. I hear what you're saying about King using a character who is a writer frequently. However, I'm liking Billy Summers despite his element of the story. I still haven't finished reading it, but it's keeping me engaged so far. What are your thoughts on Lisey's story? You may have a podcast covering your thoughts on this story, but I haven't listened to it yet because I haven't finished the book yet. For some reason, I have been having a hard time sticking with Lisey's story and getting into it. I'm a couple hundred pages into it and plan on finishing it, but it's taking a while because it's a hard read for me and don't know why. Did you have this type of experience? Maybe it's the abundance of interior monologues and the use of made-up words, blood bool, but I'm not sure. I just want to jump in, and I'm telling everyone right now, longtime listeners, this is not a Richard Bachman situation in which I am writing to myself using a pseudonym. I am not Bob, okay? Everything that I just read, this is from Bob's own words, all right? These are Bob's own criticisms of Lisey's story. So Bob continues, I only had this problem with one other King book, and it was either Desperation or The Regulators. So that's how you know that I'm not Bob, okay? Because Bob and I agree on Lisey's story. I don't agree with Bob on Desperation or The Regulators. I can't remember which. I do enjoy your podcast very much, and especially enjoyed your shows on 20th Century Ghosts, especially your breakdown of the title story and pop art and Strange Weather by Joe Hill. Thanks for bringing us your podcasts, Bob. Bob, thank you for writing in, and as I just joked, I don't like Lisey's story. I just reviewed the ending in the last episode, and I had my breakdown of the entire book years ago when I reviewed the entirety of it. But and I acknowledge that maybe that there is something that I am missing. I go back and forth. Sometimes I say I'll never read the book again. Sometimes I say to myself, you know what, I'm just going to wait a few years until I'm older and more in the, the mindset of where King might have been with more life experience behind me to fully appreciate it. I don't know. But as I will talk about today with Duma Key, this was a novel that I did not enjoy upon first read, but have come to absolutely love. So a book that you just might dislike on first go around or second go around, maybe you're just not where you need to be in order to fully access its truths and its strengths. And then again, maybe Lisey's story is just a book that has a little bit too many little inside jokes, and it isn't fully formed. But, I will continue to go back to Lisey's story every 10 or so years. So if you stick with me, I'll let you know how I feel about Lisi's story in another 10 years or so. But Bob, thank you for writing in. And, with what I just said, I would encourage you to go back to Desperation or The Regulators. I found both to be incredibly strong novels. The Regulators, I don't think, gets as much love as Desperation, and I think that both are equally strong for completely different reasons. And it has been my pleasure to review the works of Joe Hill as well. Pop art is absolutely beautiful, and Strange Weather was all of the stories in Strange Weather I thought were fantastic. Then we have Mike, who writes, spoiler alert. So first of all, no, Mike does not write that, but it is a spoiler alert for Gwendy's Final Task. Dear constant host, it is nice that you are back to putting out episodes again. Like many of your listeners, I'm sure I never really got tired of Stephen King content. I just finished Gwendy's Final Task and thought I'd ask you about a few things that raised questions for me. I recall you saying in one of your more recent episodes that you were halfway done, so I'm thinking that you're also finished by now. In case you are not, here be spoilers. 1. We are reunited with not only Gwendy but also Richard Ferris. I always figured this to be Randall Flagg, who was, of course, one of Roland's adversaries in the Dark Tower and pretty much the adversary of every story he's ever been in. But he's seemingly portrayed as an ally in this book. He wants Gwendy to destroy the box, a contrast to the Taheen that killed Gwendy's husband and looked to use the box to make the tower fall. Granted, at this point, it's been almost 20 years since I read the Dark Tower books, and 4 or 5 or even 6 years since I've listened to your Dark Tower episodes. So maybe I'm misremembering Flagg's intention in those novels. Perhaps the chaos Flagg has historically sought is not the same as the Taheen? Is that right? Is it awfully hard to be Randall Flagg if the universe does not exist? 2. And this is a spoiler alert for the Dark Tower Book 7, The Dark Tower. Please keep this in mind for this next question. Related, Ferris is sick, deathly ill, in fact, in this book. This is, of course, quite different from Flagg's demise at the hands. Again, spoiler alert for Book 7 of The Dark Tower, The Dark Tower. This is different from Flagg's demise at the hands of Crawling Legs, of Mordred. This perhaps is due to Ferris not being an alias of Flagg, but maybe a twinner? Thoughts? Number 3, it is mentioned in Gwendy's Final Task that the Crimson King is dead. I don't recall the Crimson King coming up much since Patrick Danville mostly erased him in Book 7, so there's of course a whole new book series worth of story that could have resulted in the Crimson King's death in the interim. So I'm really just asking what you think about the Crimson King being killed off in this fashion. Just mentioned as an afterthought. Do you think the Crimson King being killed in any way relates to Roland succeeding in a subsequent trek to the tower? Anyway, it's good that you're back, and I'm selfishly looking forward to another version of the Kingcast after you get through the endings. Long days and pleasant nights, Mike. Mike, so let me break this down by each of the points. First of all, these are all wonderful, thoughtful questions that are that naturally come up, I think, if you read Gwendy's Final Task and think of it through a critical lens to see how it correlates with the entirety of what has come before in the publication history of Stephen King. So, with Randall Flagg, and I think I talked about this in my review of Gwendy's Final Task, but the characterization of the Richard Ferris character, who, I believe was, really meant to invoke Randall Flagg. I mean, why else create an RF character who is coming to Castle Rock? That was one of my criticisms about Gwendy's, the whole Gwendy thing, is that it seems very, though Stephen King is co-writing it, at least the first and the third, there's a fanficky quality to it. And so the idea of Randall Flagg coming to Castle Rock and abutting with Derry, and there's the Dark Tower and the Taheen and references to the Crimson King. Yeah, like I said, there are components to it that can be read as very fan fiction-y. So to me, this was you know, Richard Ferris was wearing all black. Who else wears all black? The Man in Black. Who is the Man in Black? Randall Flagg. So, I mean, yes, I mean, I think that he is meant to be Randall Flagg, and Randall Flagg has been a chaos agent who, his allegiances have seemingly shifted depending on the books that you read. If you read him in The Stand, he is, really just embodying chaos. He's doesn't have a grand plan. He's more like the Joker in The Dark Knight. Like he says, I'm just chasing cars. I mean, he's someone, he was an opportunist. He only came to power because the world died. He was not instrumental in the fall of the world of The Stand. Humanity's hubris is, and he took advantage of it. He thought that he was the end all be all, and his belief in himself ultimately was his undoing. Then we see him in Eyes of the Dragon, in which he seems to be a little bit more shrewd, and less. I don't want to say passionate, because he is very passionate. Might not be the right word, but full of passion. In The Stand, full of hot air, maybe is a better way of phrasing it. In Eyes of the Dragon, he's colder, maybe more calculating, a little bit more shrewd. But there are similarities there. I would say you can definitely draw the line between the Flagg that we see in The Stand to the Flagg as we see him in Eyes of the Dragon, and keep in mind that they're share the same name. And I think that once we make the connection between those two, then we're able to connect the triangle to the Man in Black from the gunslinger, and this is where we start to get these connections. But within each interpretation, there are variations and differences, but none so varied as the interpretation of Richard Ferris. No, I mean, my criticism there is that Richard Ferris is, an ally. He's not an agent of chaos. He is not working on behalf of either the Crimson King or himself. In each of the books, as we have seen Flagg, like I said, we have seen him with shifting allegiances, so we never really know who exactly he's working for. He says he's working for the Crimson King, but is he really? I never really got the impression that he was. I got the impression that he claimed that he was, but I got the impression that he was always working for himself. But here we see him, working on behalf of a greater good. He is working on behalf of the White. And even if he hasn't sent by the White or Gon or the Turtle or whoever, he's definitely working in favor of. He wants to assist the goodness of the world to stop these chaotic, antagonistic, tragic events from happening. Ultimately, he does not want the tower to fall, which just doesn't seem very Randall Flaggish or Richard Ferris or Walter O'Dimishness. It doesn't seem to be what he would do. So I don't quite get it. When it comes to the Gwendy books, I just don't quite get this particular interpretation. So maybe this is another go-around on Ka, on the Wheel of Ka. And maybe this means that when, spoiler alert, again, please, spoiler alert for the Dark Tower series. But after, things are reset by Roland, in Roland's own existence, maybe it has... a very thematic effect throughout the multiverse. And maybe this results with a kinder version of Walter Paddock. I don't know.
Looking for an escape? Try Ghosts in the Burbs. a podcast that began as a collection of stories about the people of Wellesley, Massachusetts, and the ghosts and monsters who haunt them, and expanded to include cozy scares in other suburban settings. Ghosts in the Burbs is written by me, Liz Sauer. These stories include no gore, no extreme horror, and no ads, ever. Just cozy, creepy escape. Find Ghosts in the Burbs wherever you listen to podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Peloton. The new cross-training series balances your workouts with 15-plus workout types for endless movements on and off your equipment. Stay motivated with weekly personalized plans that guide you from beginner to expert and push past your goals with routines tailored to you. Get the new cross-training series. Terms apply.
I'm not sure. And this goes back to your second point. Maybe this isn't Flag. Maybe it's a twinner. That's a great idea. It's a great idea. I mean, we have seen multiple incarnations of characters that have that are devilish or wizard-like, whether it be Flag or Leland Gaunt or Andre Lenoge. We see these roguish, charming, magic characters. So maybe this is another one that happens to be closer to Randall Flagg than Andre Lenoge or Leland Gaunt. Maybe there's more of a relation there. I don't know. That's a really interesting point. And in terms of the Crimson King being dead, maybe. I don't know. Or maybe they're just the world thinks, or the multiverse thinks that the Crimson King is dead. I don't know. There's definitely a lot of questions there, and I'm not sure what any of them mean. But these are wonderful questions, and if anyone has any thoughts, please write into the stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. All right, everyone, I'm going to get into my review of the conclusion of Duma Key. So before I get to the actual conclusion, I'm going to read the Wikipedia summary so I have a basis upon which I can build my analysis. So, wealthy Minnesotan building contractor Edgar Freemantle barely survives a severe worksite accident wherein his truck is crushed by a crane. Freemantle loses his right arm while suffering severe head injuries, impairing his speech, vision, and memory. During his long recovery, Edgar experiences suicidal thoughts and violent abusive mood swings, spurring his wife to file for divorce. On advice of his psychologist, Dr. Kamen, Edgar relocates southward, renting a beach house on the island of Duma Key off Florida's coast. Kamen further advises Freemantle to rekindle his one-time sketching hobby as a restorative. Edgar retains local college student Jack Cantori as a part-time shopper and personal assistant. Soon after, Freemantle meets and befriends the island's other full-time residents, octogenarian heiress Elizabeth Eastlake, sufferer of final stage dementia whose family's trust owns most of the island, and her live-in attendant Jerome Wireman, himself a once gifted attorney whose wife and daughter's tragic deaths led him to unsuccessfully attempt suicide via a gunshot wound. Decades-old paranormal phenomena revisit the island as Freemantle delves obsessively into his art. Edgar creates with furious energy, lapsing into semi-conscious haze. His paintings and sketches capture psychic visions, revealing his ex-wife's romantic affair, his friend's suicidal depression, and his younger daughter's Ilsa's fleeting marital engagement. Later, Freemantle uses his newfound artistic powers to manipulate the outside world, healing Wireman's degenerating neurological condition and suffocating a child murderer in his jail cell. During Ilse's visit to Duma Key, the father-daughter duo drive to a disused, overgrown section of the island where colors seem unnaturally vivid, and Ilse becomes violently ill. Elizabeth Eastlake warns Edgar via telephone conversations that Duma has never been a lucky place for daughters, and that his paintings should be sold to multiple geographically distant buyers lest their otherworldly power grow too concentrated or too dangerous. Freemantle comes to learn that Duma Key's beach house has hosted many successful artists during its 80-year tenure. Elizabeth Eastlake was herself a prodigious artist in her childhood, and both Edgar and Wireman manifest pronounced psychic talents while on or near the island, seemingly stemming from their debilitating brain injuries. Fremantle's artworks become more vivid and distressing, featuring ship and seaside compositions whose vessels and mysterious red-cloaked passengers draw nearer to the shore in each successive painting. Elizabeth grows alternately lucid and then incoherent as her dementia worsens, scattering her beloved china figurines, murmuring that the table is leaking, and repeatedly urging Wireman to throw one faceless figurine into her koi pond. In a moment of chilling clarity, Eastlake asks Edgar if he has begun painting the ship yet. Fremantle's paintings attract statewide acclaim. He hosts an art exhibition and accompanying lecture at an upscale Sarasota gallery, gaining a devoted audience, including Edgar's visiting loved ones, and yielding $500,000 in sales. Elizabeth Eastlake makes a rare appearance at said exhibition. Upon seeing Edgar's ship and seaside paintings, she reacts violently, making cryptic references to her childhood playthings and long-drowned sisters, warning that she has grown so strong the table is leaking and drown her back to sleep before suffering an incapacitating and ultimately fatal stroke. Fremantle notices previously unseen details in his work: the ship's rotting sails, children's toys littering its decks, screaming faces hiding in its foamy wake. Narrative timelines interweave as Edgar Fremantle's present-day nightmare parallels the 1927 Eastlake familial tragedy. Young Elizabeth, suffering a head wound in a childhood horse carriage accident, turns to sketching and scribbling as a means of recuperation. An outside presence, Percy, speaks to Elizabeth, sometimes in her mind or sometimes through her rag doll, filling her with knowledge, reality-altering powers, and a gradual infiltration of sinister urges. Elizabeth directs her bootlegger's father to a pile of ship debris in the shallows, unearthing a red-cloaked porcelain figure. The girl's sketches grow progressively more alien and malevolent until, driven by fear, she rebels against Percy, provoking the entity's wrath. As an act of retaliation, Elizabeth's twin sisters are lured into the ocean to drown. Only Elizabeth's nursemaid, Melda, takes direct action as Percy's drowned sister things move beachward. The governess holds them off by means of silver jewelry, buying precious moments with her life while Elizabeth neutralizes the Percy statuette. Fremantle faces similar otherworldly dangers while unraveling the Eastlake mystery. He returns home to find where our sister childishly scrawled on an unused canvas. Edgar then discovers that those in possession of his artwork either die or are possessed and driven into murderous deeds by Percy. He persuades his loved ones to discard their paintings, but not before a co-opted art critic drowns his daughter, Ilse. As Edgar, Jack, and Wireman race to discover the secret of mad Persephone's rise and subsequent banishment, the ghost ship's undead passengers return for them. Fighting their way to the island's overgrown region, Heron's Roost, the original Eastlake Manor, the trio locate the Percy carving, trapped in fresh as opposed to her native salt water, and sealed in a water-filled ceramic keg of table whiskey in which a crack has formed during the passage of years. Hence the table is leaking. Edgar returns the figurine to its freshwater slumber and faces down one final Percy temptation wearing the face of his drowned daughter Ilse. Fremantle and Wireman then fly north to Minnesota, where they drop the statuette in Lake Phelan's freshwater depths so it can forever sleep undisturbed. Wireman makes plans to move to Mexico and start up a hotel business. He asks Fremantle to join him when he is ready and if he wants to. However, Wireman dies of a heart attack only 2 months later, before Fremantle has a chance to see him again. Edgar Fremantle then commences his final painting, a massive tropical storm destroying Duma Key. So, what's the criteria for a good ending? I'm going to ask a series of questions, beginning with this. Does it provide an appropriate conclusion to its characters that is consistent with the characters' actions, conflicts, or themes of the book? And I would say yes. I mean, this is a character-driven novel. Now, I want to reiterate, this is now the second time I'm talking about Duma Key in full as a focus, but longtime listeners will know that I've definitely referenced Duma Key throughout the years, because when I first read it, coming off the mythology heavy and plot heavy stories of the Dark Tower, where everything was really just...
Running a business is hard enough, so why make it harder with a dozen different apps that don't talk to each other? One for sales, another for inventory, a separate one for accounting. Before you know it, you're drowning in software instead of growing your business. This is where Odoo comes in. Odoo is the only business software you'll ever need. It's an all-in-one, fully integrated platform that handles everything: CRM, accounting, inventory, e-commerce, HR, and more. No more app overload. No more juggling logins. Just one seamless system that makes work easier. And the best part, Odoo replaces multiple expensive platforms for a fraction of the cost. It's built to grow with your business, whether you are just starting out or already scaling up. Plus, it's easy to use, customizable, and designed to streamline every process, so you can focus on what really matters: running your business. Thousands of businesses have made the switch, so why not you? Try Odoo for free at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
Coming to a head. That was, looking for the ways in which all of these different characters were interacting with each other, and the way all these different plots were interacting with each other to finally resolve the conclusion of this decades-spanning opus of the Dark Tower. Post the Dark Tower, I was very critical of Stephen King, and I was just out on him. And when I first read Duma Key, I was just very lukewarm on this novel, because it was just such a... to me, it's not doing a favor by calling it a hangout book, but in some ways it is. You are really just hanging out with Edgar. It is Edgar's story. You are just really in this world of melancholy and rejuvenation and second chances that life gives him, because you're right there. You are right there. So the appropriate conclusion to this character, comes with his conclusion of Duma Key, and what Duma Key means for him as it being a second chance. And I'll get to that in terms of themes, but this is a novel that began with tragedy and concludes with tragedy, and with each of the tragedies that occur, we see an opportunity for life to continue. And I think that that's important. And again, I will get back into that in a little bit more detail with the themes, symbolisms, and motifs. But for him to start off his time at Duma Key having just survived tragedy and recovering from tragedy and finding new life in this place of beauty and horror, and finding friendship and new worth of himself and new talents that he finds within himself. We see this through to the end, where he sees more tragedy and then again overcomes it and faces it and defeats it. He continues on. He continues to live his life. So yes, I think that this is consistent with the character's actions, conflicts, or themes of the book. Does it successfully wrap up the plot? Specifically, do the events build upon one another with consistency? Yes, we had seen mysteries and pieces of a puzzle of the history of Duma Key and the beach house and the artistry throughout the years, and Persephone and the ships. And so yes, it does wrap up the plot. And if I was going to knock anything within this book, it would be the plot, the actual structured story. Percy is defeated. Edgar defeats Percy. I do find it lacking. I will say that. So I would say at the ending is... I'm going to jump right to it. I'm more favorable on the ending because I'm more favorable on the entirety of the book. But I would say that if we were to criticize anything of the conclusion, it would be the plot component here, because I do feel that it is somewhat lacking. Going to the house just being overgrown, them being warded off by an alligator and not some other mythological creature or something stranger than that. It seems less than to me. With a novel about a mysterious ghost ship, the fact that the ghost ship itself doesn't factor in as a physical entity, I think is a missed opportunity to the wonders and the magic and the mysteries of the ocean and ocean life on a seaside, coastal, tropical location. I think there's missed opportunity there from a plot perspective as the plot interacts with the setting. So I do find that, though I think technically it does wrap up the plot, we get the conclusion of Percy. And I don't need to know the history of this ghostly character. I don't need to know the background. I don't need there to be an explanation for this mysterious supernatural creature. I don't need that. Okay, so that's not a knock. The fact that that's not fully explored, totally fine with. In fact, I want that mystery to endure. But the fact that the conclusion from a plot perspective is not that harrowing, or doesn't live up to the supernatural surrealism, or the culmination of the fulfillment of artistic expression, as it is depicted in this novel from a character perspective. I mean, artistry is such a massive component of this book, and to have the main character be defined by this rekindled ability of art to not have that art in of itself be a part of the conclusion, I think it's a missed opportunity. Spoiler alert for Needful Things, and this could actually be used against me, and I totally understand. But throughout the entirety of Needful Things, one of the aspects of Alan Pangborn's character was that he was a prestidigitator. He was someone that practiced just everyday illusions and magic tricks. And this is something that played into the end of the novel, where when the atmosphere, the environment of Needful Things, Maine, or Castle Rock, Maine, was just so rich with magics. His own magic was amplified. I'm fine with that. Some people aren't. But I just think similarly, something like that could be a part of the conclusion of Duma Key that would have been a little bit more naturalistic for the ending of this novel, and I feel like this particular component is somewhat lacking. Next question. Does the conclusion serve the theme, symbolism, and motifs? Yes. Because this book is about second chances, and the ending demonstrates that if there is that there's no real thing as clean second chances. A second chance is really just another part of life. Just like we saw the artist granted special powers by the beach house, Percy, and going back generations. Okay, that's just life. Life continued in Duma Key, and life granted these second chances and artistry to the people that lived in this beach house year after year after year. It's just another example of how life continues, and Edgar moves to Florida to start over. But just because you're starting over doesn't mean that it stops life from its fullest, which means that you're going to get triumph, but you're also going to get tragedy, and we see that here. It started with tragedy. His injury, his descent into depression and anger, and divorce. And then we see the book as this second chance. But yes, he has a friendship with Wireman. He has a new lease on life with his art. But it doesn't stop the tragedy, because that's a part of life as well. And that means that there's really no second chances. It's just life. Life keeps moving along with tragedy and triumph. And we see this. Like, his daughter dies, but he still has victory over Percy. So it's both, and that's life. And I think that serves the theme of the book. Next question, it's, what's the most famous scene in the novel, and does it appear in the conclusion of the story? Again, I don't think that this... If there is a famous scene, the most famous scene, and it factors into the conclusion of the book, I think that it helps. I don't think it hurts a book if the most famous scene isn't in the conclusion. In this case, I don't know if there is a famous scene of Duma Key. Duma Key has not been adapted. Duma Key is not talked about. I don't know if there is a famous scene. And are there any other factors that we need to consider? I just think that this is an unsung triumph from Stephen King. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful novel that I hope is revisited throughout the years, because it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And I will again take this opportunity to please, I really hope that Mike Flanagan likes this book and adapts this book into one of his masterpieces, because I love what Mike Flanagan is able to do with Stephen King properties, and I think that this would be an incredible, an absolutely incredible adaptation from Mike Flanagan. I think that he would just nail it, and he would bring the tragedy and the triumph and the horror and the humor and the heart in this incredible location to life in such a beautiful way. So please, Mike Flanagan, please, please, please make this happen. Do I like the ending? Nah, not really. I don't really like it. But is it a good ending? Yes, I will say that, yeah, it's a good ending. So I happen to like 35 out of 41 endings, and I would say 36 out of 41 endings are good. So thus concludes my review of the conclusion of Duma Key, and I will be back next time. I almost said next week, but not next week. I'll be back next time for Under the Dome. Oh, it's going to be interesting to talk about the conclusion of Under the Dome. People just straight up don't like that ending. And I can't wait to talk about it in a little bit more detail. So if you like the Stephen King cast, you like talking about the Stephen King cast, please write into stephenkingcast at yahoo.com and tell me your thoughts, or leave me a review. That would greatly help me out, everybody. On iTunes. So thank you very much, and may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I will see you here next time, where MOON spells Stephen King cast.